Awesome. Thank you, Summer. And as always, and I know a couple of people already said they can't come on camera tonight because there's crazy stuff in the background, but if you can come on camera, we'd just love to be able to see you. Thanks, guys. All right, we're going to dive right in. We are picking up, we're in the doctor's opinion. In the fourth edition, it's Roman numeral 26, which is XXVI. If you're in the third edition, it's Roman numeral 24, XXIV. And we're at the very bottom paragraph. So we get one paragraph, and then we're going to get into the doctor's second letter. And here we go. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer.
I have the definition for altruistic or altruism, which is an unselfish interest in others. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, the unselfish interest in others. We favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged.
Yeah. Altruism is doing stuff for the good. So we're going to work out our solution on the spiritual and an altruistic plane. So, right, we're going to have a spiritual awakening. That's what we're just starting to get the sense of very early in the book. And we're going to do it from a moral, from a for the good reason. This saying, listen, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who's very jittery or befogged. So let's not play amateur ER doctors ourselves. We're living in a day and age. We have wonderful medical facilities, right? Somebody who needs to be detoxed, we don't need to do it on our living room couch with a bottle of vodka anymore. We can take them to a hospital and get them the help they need. But things were very different in 1939 as well, right? But they were still saying, take people to the hospital when they need it. And more often than not, it's imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he's approached. There's a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. A little later in the book, it talks about making an approach to an alcoholic right after they've been on a binge when they're still a little jittery. So I think there's a little bit of art that's being suggested here about the right time to make an approach to somebody to offer help. Not when they're so befogged, this is a great word, that they cannot think, but maybe coming off the cusp of that last binge so that they have a little bit more willingness to talk about the magnitude, the seriousness of their condition.
Yeah, so when I look at the bottom of that page there, we're talking about a solution. Yeah, there truly is a solution. That's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not that there may be, or there perhaps someday there will be. No, there is absolutely a true solution, and it's spiritual in nature. So as I go through this work here and I look at this altruistic plane that I'm going to be on, so I'll put it in first person for me anyways. When my sponsees cannot love themselves, I will love them until they can love themselves. In other words, I'll be very attentive to, I always tell my guys right up front, I will match your willingness. That means if we need to talk every day, that's great. You know, I'm a busy guy, but at the same time, I'll make time for you. But we're going to get busy and do this work together. So I have to be selfless to reap the benefits and have the spiritual awakening. And that's what I'm trying to give to him through the works of the steps. And then we get the words of being jittery and befogged, which is detox, like David just mentioned. I've had 12-step calls where I had to call other alcoholics because I did not know what to do. And I thought somehow I would be able to help them in some way or shape or form. And the guy I called had 44 years of sobriety. He goes, no, dude, we need to get him to a hospital now. He is going to die. Because people die from this all day long. So I always try to, and it's suggested that we do that, 2 or more of us. Then onto the top of the next page, this is good for, I like this very much. This says, the bottom of the page, I'll finish after the comment, it says, as he has then a better chance of understanding. Understanding what? This threefold illness that I have, a body, mind, and spirit, and this threefold solution of recovery, unity, and service, and then accepting what? Our first step, and the fact that I have no power. The opposite of powerlessness is what? Power. And I'm going to have access to this power all day long as I get unblocked and understand as we go through this work that selfishness and self-centeredness, that is the root to all my troubles. And if you have a tree in your yard and you want to look and see how deep the roots are, go ahead and try. We don't know how deep those roots are. And that's the same as my selfishness and self-centeredness. I don't know how deep they are. And what we have to offer, we offer a spiritual experience. That's what we offer. That's the only thing we offer.
I did, if it's okay, wanted to reiterate the definitions of alcoholism before we get into the second letter. So the 1938 Webster Dictionary says the definition of alcoholism is a diseased condition caused by an excess use of alcoholic liquors. And then Ashton, my sponsee, who's an ICU nurse, also brought forth to our attention the medical definition of alcoholism today, which is alcoholism is defined as a medical condition characterized by an impaired ability to stop or control alcohol use despite adverse social, occupational, or health consequences. A person will have to drink greater amounts to achieve the same effect and has withdrawal symptoms when stopping alcohol use. And
sorry, go ahead, please.
And then I just wanted to put that with this letter, and the rest of the big book, we're going to get into what AA's definition of alcoholism is.
Yeah, well said. The part of that medical definition that Sam just gave us that should ring a bell to those of you familiar with the mental powerlessness is that in the face of consequences, what she just read, the real alcoholic drinks again. The doctor writes, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. Sam, I think you got a word in there, right?
Yeah, I have paramount. Paramount is the highest rank. The subject presented in this book seems to be of the highest rank of importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction.
I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. So what's Dr. Silkworth saying here? He's saying what Bill and his peers have written here is the highest importance to people who are addicted to alcohol. And he is giving that opinion about the contents of the book, given his triage experience, beyond triage and treatment experience, being in the trenches, working with, my understanding, somewhere between 40 and 50,000 alcoholics and addicts over the course of his career.
So just like earlier in the book, in the preface in the front, we have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. We recovered. The first 100 have recovered. Well, that's their experience, guys. And they're all dead, so we can't go check. But that is their experience, right? And it's just our experience here. We say this. This is his experience here, the doctor's talking about. The subject for the end of this book seems to be, to me, of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcohol addiction, because he's talking about his experience with other alcoholics. Guys who, maybe some of them are moderate drinkers, some of them are hard drinkers, but Bill was a real alcoholic, as we'll find out through the book, and especially when you get into Bill's story in the first 13 pages of the story of what it was like. He's a real alcoholic. This is the doctor's experience. I can't argue with this.
We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. I know Sam's got a bunch of words here too. Give them to us slow and easy here.
Okay. I have moral and synthetic. So moral is concerned with or relating to what is right and wrong in matters of human behavior / ethical. So we doctors have realized for a long time that some form of ethical psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. And then we have synthetic, which is man-made. So what with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we perhaps were not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside of our man-made knowledge.
So two requests real quick, Sam. While we're talking, maybe can you just get us a nice, simple definition of psychology? And then also moral psychology is itself a particular term. See if you can find us a 10-word or less explanation of moral psychology, what that movement means. Thank you. Go ahead, David.
So I am very confused by this paragraph the first time I read it. So I'm going to change some of the words around a little bit just to make it a little bit simpler for me. So it says, we doctors. So these are the doctors, and they've realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics. So what they're talking about there is they understood that they can't fix anyone with this alcoholic disease. So they have to have we have to have as an alcoholic a spiritual experience. And that was an urgent importance to alcoholics. The definition of urgent is requiring an immediate action or attention. This needs to be done now. So I put down the bottle for a week or 2 weeks, but I pick it back up again because of the obsession, and then I break out in craving. I'm worse than I've ever have been before, because once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. So as we go through the rest of this sentence, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. The doctor can't help us alcoholics. He can't fix us. Usually you go in, you get a diagnosis, and then he cut us a prescription. He's telling us the spiritual experience is a prescription. And then what of our ultra-modern standards, spiritual experience, the doctor in his scientific approach to everything, and the doctors are perhaps not well equipped to apply powers of good. What are they talking about there? They're talking about God. They're talking about God. They can't provide that for us, but they know, Silkworth knows, we'll find out Carl Jung knows, that they're good doctors. They can't fix us, but they know that we have to find a power greater than ourselves. And synthetic knowledge is their experience, man-made. They're all their 12 years of college, all their times in the operating room or whatever practice they're doing, that's what they're basing this off of. But he's being very, very honest with us here.
So this language is tricky, because not only is it a little clunky and old-fashioned from 1939-ish, but it's also medical speak. So, David broke it down nicely for us, but I want to do it one more time because I really want to make sure you understand the simple concept behind what they're saying with a little bit of clunky language. He's just saying we doctors know, they've experienced that for alcoholics, our brains need to change in a good way urgently. And I think we can agree with that. But its application presented difficulties beyond the conception. So they knew something needed to change in our brains. It had to happen right away, but they couldn't figure out how to give it to us. And then he goes on to say, listen, we've got ultra modern standards, right? They're doing everything to the best of that they've proven out. And they've got a scientific approach. You guys remember that from school? It's where you have independent variables, and you change one thing at a time. You come to a hypothesis, right? There's a whole methodology. There's a whole practice. And then he says, so we're modern. We take this very mechanical approach, and we still can't give alcoholics a spiritual experience. We can't get them to God. No matter how well educated, no matter 12 years of school, like David said, and even Dr. Silkworth, decades in the field, couldn't get it done. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book, talking about the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, came under our care in this hospital, Towns Hospital, right? And while here, he acquired some ideas, which he put into practical application at once. Go ahead, David.
Oh, okay. So many years ago, we're talking about Bill Wilson. He's a leading contributor to this book, came under the care at Towns Hospital. And while he requires some ideas, he had some ideas on how he could get sober, but what he found out was, which he put into practical application, those were given to him by Ebby. Those are the 6 steps of the Oxford group, which we can find in the 3rd edition on page 292 and page 263 in the 4th edition, right? If I'm correct, and he sells himself short. So those were the steps. And Bill worked those things immediately. Immediately, he needed to get to God. And then he had his barn burning experience because of it.
So I'm not going to underscore too much of what David said, other than, spoiler alert, he put into practical application at once. The spoiler is chapter 6. We have a chapter called Into Action. It's not called Into Consideration, Into Thinking, Into I'll get around to it. Into action. Later, so we're still talking about Bill Wilson here, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves, and still more in the power, capital P, which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Pretty dramatic flair here for a doctor. Go ahead, Sam.
I have the definition of chronic, which is of a disease continuing for a long time. So they believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic of a disease continuing for a long time, alcoholics back from the gates of death.
And also another part of that is to add on to that definition is constantly reoccurring, this disease. Okay, it doesn't go away. You know, it just doesn't go away. But in this paragraph, so we're talking in the middle of that sentence says, this is a description the doctor is giving of what a recovered alcoholic. First of all, Bill had the thought that I need to go work with other alcoholics in his hospital bed on day 3. Are you kidding me? That was not my thought on day 3. My thought was, how am I going to get my job back? How am I going to get mama back? How am I going to get my dude? I was thinking about me. This guy has selfless motives to get rid of self, which is my problem. And this amazes me that he had this. So there's no doubt in my mind that he had that white flash. There's no doubt. And then this unselfish, these men, as we have come to know them, and the doctor's blown away by this, the entire absence of profit motive and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to those who've labored long. So he's talking about themselves and all the doctors wearily in this alcoholic field. He's describing what a recovered alcoholic looks like. Right there, right now. That's what we look like. If we are absent from profit motive and we are full of community spirit, and then we are selfless. Dude, that's what I'm trying to shoot for every day, to be of service to God and all the people about me all day long.
And what is the doctor's description here? The unselfishness, the absence of profit motive, the community spirit. Guess what kind of people we know exhibit those characteristics? Recovered alcoholics, recovered from the hopeless state of mind and body. I turned from being this selfish, egocentric guy, just fully consumed with me, into, I'm actually going to go out and do something in the spirit of altruism, to use the word we just used before. This is what recovered alcoholics do. You're going to hear us harp on this soapbox on this over and over. David was just talking about third day in the hospital. Bill's like, man, I got to start helping some people. You don't have to do a show of hands here. But are you one of those people? And I was one of these people at the beginning who said, I can't sponsor anybody yet. I'm afraid. I don't know what I'm doing. I got to wait until my sponsor tells me I have to sponsor. Do you know how many ways we can be of service to newcomers before we figured out how to formally sponsor someone. And by the way, how soon is too soon? That concept doesn't come up in the book. What it does tell us, man, we'll get to it 2 years from now. It says nothing is better to the recovering alcoholic in his first few weeks than working with other alcoholics. And they're not talking about working with a sponsor. It's talking about working with newcomers into action, into urgent action, not into when it feels right. Immediacy, key.
And to David's point, a lot of times, and we don't do this real often, but when we go to treatment centers a couple of times a month, we'll bring one of our new guys with us so they can experience what it's like. Who are they identifying with in treatment? The guy with 2 weeks or the guy with a couple 24 hours like David and I, right? They're like blown away that somebody has 2 weeks of sobriety. They can't put together 2 hours sometimes. Are you kidding? You know, so on this paragraph that David read here, and we're not going forward in the book. We're going to try not to, I'm going to try not to do that.
Yeah.
But just so you know, Bill's recovery and that admission of what he did there is on page 14 in the 5th paragraph. So you can thumb ahead and see that he did it. This is Bill's experience. Dr. Silkworth writes about it in here. And then on the bottom of that paragraph, they said they believe in themselves and still more in the power by which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Page 27, right? David's favorite page in the book, one of his two. You know, with Roland Hazard, the gates of hell were going to clank shut on him until Jung told him that he needed to have a spiritual experience. So these guys are full of power. We have been gifted power, favor of a power greater than myself. And I'm going to do a talk on Friday. I'm going to do it on the 10th step. You know what it's like to be placed in a position of neutrality? Well, no hands raising here, but I do. And I bet you a whole lot of us do too. I bet you do. But that is nothing like that. Oh my goodness. All day long, placed in a position of neutrality. Safe and protected. I know, I went ahead.
Yeah.
I
There is
did
a
want
10th step. Spoiler alert. There's a 10th step. There we go. Go ahead.
Yeah, 10th step.
I did want to go back to moral psychology because I looked it up really quickly from some sort of .edu website. It says moral psychology is how people integrate moral ideals into the development of their own character.
Thank you. So how do I use concepts of being good and healthy into the person that I've become? Sounds a lot like a program recovery. All right, here we go. Now we're getting into the meat of the matter. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit.
So great information from the doctor, because what I have is this alcoholic ought to be free from his physical craving. So, dude, I'm detoxing. I'm coming out of my skin. I have DTs. I gotta be taken care of by medical staff. You can die from this, guys. You can absolutely die from alcohol. A lot of different ways. So it requires a definite hospital-safe procedure before the psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. So got to get well physically, then I can start understanding the nature of the obsession of the mind, the problem, that the greater part of this illness.
Okay, so now we're getting into another one of my favorite pages. I know one of David's favorite too. So as we've been alluding to and talking about a lot in passing, the definition of the real alcoholic, as it comes up repeatedly in the book, is that we're ill in three ways. We're ill physically powerless. We're ill mentally powerless. And we're ill spiritually. We have a unmanageability in our life. The part of the chapter we're really going to get into now is the doctor's going to really start to break down. This next paragraph really is a dynamite paragraph. It's going to help us understand the physical allergic reaction the real alcoholic has to alcohol. Okay? And before we read it, I want to start to read the first sentence, but I just want to break there for a sec to give a little bit more historical context. Because as it continues, it says, we believe and so suggested a few years ago. So what the doctor's talking about, what he suggested a few years ago, remember this is published in 1939, is one of the things that Silkworth did was, as many doctors and scientists do, he wrote papers. So in 1937, Dr. Silkworth wrote a paper called Alcoholism as a Manifestation of an Allergy. So this was his scientific paper that he wrote as a physician. It wasn't for AA members, it was for the medical community. And what we'll do is I'll get with Heather Summer to post a link to this in our recap, because I think some of you enjoy it. And you'll see a lot of what he talks about in this paper shows up here in the doctor's opinion. But I want to read just the opening paragraph and just part of a little paragraph later on that I think really underscores the points he was trying to make in this paper. And I'll read it slowly because, again, it's a little medically. So the doctor says in this paper, it opens with, alcoholism is considered by many physicians a chronic condition that gradually unfolds itself to a dismal end. I think we all get that. It's chronic, it's recurring, long-lasting, to a dismal end, death, right? Doctors feel, now listen to this, doctors feel that it is a state of mind, that alcoholism is a state of mind, and they advise these patients that it's up to them to discontinue their accustomed drug, which it is assumed they can do by merely making up their minds to do so. Anybody try to merely make up your mind to stop drinking? Yeah, how'd it go, right? Proper attention is not given to the psychological problem as well as the physical condition of these people. So what he's saying is, hey, you guys as my peers, you guys think this is just a matter of willpower, and that if you tell your alcoholic patients the seriousness of their condition, they're just going to stop. And what he goes on to say is the doctors are not paying attention to the state of mind and the state of body of these alcoholics. And the whole sort of paper goes on like this, and I think everybody will appreciate it. But I just want to read this one, about 4 paragraphs more, because this is where he really starts to hammer his opinion. He says, we may set it down as a fundamental proposition that alcoholism is not a habit. Second, drunkenness and alcoholism are not synonymous. Anybody didn't know, got friends, family that like to get drunk every now and then, right? And guess what happens when they're not drunk? They're not drinking. They're cool. Drunkenness and alcoholism are not synonymous. Intoxication with alcohol, as commonly observed, is a purely superficial manifestation of no diagnostic importance whatever in itself. He says just because somebody is drunk, that's, you don't diagnose that. That's just something that happens to some people. Nor is the desire to take a drink, which is common to many. The majority of people who drink alcohol apparently do so with impunity. Right? And some of that language will sound familiar, and we're going to read it again as we go on further here. This was very contrary to the modern thinking in 1937. Right? So he really was going out on a limb with his opinion. Okay, so we're on the top of Roman numeral 28, XXVIII in the 4th edition. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. I'm just going to pause there. We're going to pause in the middle here. So what this old-timey language means is that when I drink alcohol as a chronic alcoholic, it activates an allergy in me. I have an allergic reaction to alcohol when I put it in my body. My little joke that I tell, although I'm sure somebody used this one before me, is in truth, I have a nephew, my little nephew Braden, who has a shellfish allergy. Poor little guy. If he inadvertently eats some shrimp or something, his throat closes up. That is his allergic reaction to shellfish, right? It's very scary. My allergic reaction to alcohol is when I take a drink, my throat opens up wide. I break out in the phenomenon of craving. Go ahead, David.
So any of you guys, so we're talking about here, so I'm going to take this and put this in take the statement and turn it into a question. And I know the doctor's writing this, but I'm going to put it in first person for me. So, David, do you believe, it's so suggested, the doctor says it a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on me, this chronic alcoholic, is a manifestation of an allergy. So an abnormal reaction to something. You know, if you guys ever heard Charlie Parker, he gives a really good definition of what an allergy he thought was. God rest his soul, he died, passed on earlier this summer, but he's a phenomenal speaker. And he talks about, he goes, he is a highly allergic reaction to poison ivy, as most of us would. But as he's driving down the road, he looks to his right, he sees in the woods, he says a big patch of poison ivy. He doesn't stop the car, rip off his shirt, take down his pants, runs out into the poison ivy, rolls around in the poison ivy because he has an abnormal reaction to it. So he doesn't have an obsession. We're not talking about the obsession here. We're talking about having an abnormal reaction to something when I put it in my body. I have no control once I put it in my body. No control whatsoever. So I can answer that question by saying, yeah, when I drink, I break out in craving.
Very important, the terminology of Alcoholics Anonymous, the terminology of 12-step recovery that is dependent on the book. You'll hear David and I, we always try to take great care, and sometimes we screw up, of course, right? Especially when we get rolling. We try to use the terminology that appears in the book consistently. And we always encourage everyone that comes to our studies that we work with, use the same terminology in the right way. Not so we sound like a bunch of robots, you know, coming off the line or a cult or anything like that. The reason why the terminology is important so that it's consistent language to use as we grow the fellowship, right? What we don't want to do is end up with the telephone game, right? Where I say something to David and he says it to Sam and Sam says it to Rob says it to Bert. And by the time it gets, 4, 5, 6 people down the line, the meaning is, and the words have all been lost, right? So very important when we talk about the allergy of the body, we have this phenomenon of craving. Craving happens after I put the alcohol in my body, not before, okay? The thing that we're going to study in a little bit that drives me back to pick up again, we typically call that the obsession or the compulsion. Okay? The next sentence, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Sam, I don't know if you've got phenomenon, but the average temperate drinker is someone who drinks normally. And guess what happens when normal people drink alcohol? Or maybe the better question is, guess what doesn't happen to normal drinkers when they drink? They don't have an allergic reaction. They don't break out in craving. And what did I just read from the doctor's other paper? It said there's no correlation. There's no connection between being drunk, being intoxicated, and being an alcoholic. I always say, guys, if you're like me, go back to high school or go back to college. Did you not have partners in Christ? So I went to a big school, University of Illinois, big rah-rah football, basketball, all that. And I was a fraternity guy, and all my buddies, and still my buddies today, we drank, we partied, we were maniacs. We all were. And then guess what happened when my closest buddies got into their late 20s? They calmed down. They got married. They got promotions. They had kids. They said, oh, okay, that was fun. Now I'm going to be a responsible adult. Guess what I did not do? Any of that. Because when they drank, they didn't break out in craving. They were just having fun being drunk for a long time, being stupid in our 20s. When I drank, it broke out in craving. Okay? Doesn't happen to normal drinkers. Only happens to those of us that have the allergy.
Do you want to give your definition, Sam, please?
I do have a couple definitions, but I kind of wanted to wait till the end of the paragraph. If that's okay.
Absolutely, please. So I'm just going to jump on here a little bit. So we're talking about, and I have the word never circled in my big book here. Never. Never, 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 never. This never occurs in the average temperate drinker. I've been married coming up on 33 years. My wife is not one of us. She has a glass of wine when she's making dinner tonight. We've been married for 33 years. Did I say that? I have seen her drunk one time. One time. I don't know how many she had to drink that night. We were at my niece's bat mitzvah, but once. And she says, I never want to do that again. And that was like 15 years ago. And she just said, I'm never doing it. This never happens in the average temperate drinker. Never. That word needs to be circled for me in this book. This happens for me almost every time. And I use the word almost. For me, it's every time. But there were times where I had some success where I did it a couple of times. But to David's point, I grew up with a lot of guys and worked with a lot of guys that were party animals, probably worse than me, I thought.
Yeah, sometimes.
Something changed. Something outside of them changed. Nothing internally necessarily, something externally. And they made a decision based on the facts that they're in front of me, a wife, a job, kids, and they were able to stop. Right, help. And I don't have that ability to do that. I cannot moderate. I am not a moderate drinker, and I can't do it all based off of my self-confidence. We're going to get into that in the next paragraph too.
So something else to keep in mind here is right before I started reading this paragraph, it talked about, the 3 ways in which the real alcoholic, the real addict is ill, right? Physically, mentally, and spiritually. And they go in a row, and it becomes a circle, actually. The physical part is at the tail end. So we're really working backwards. Nothing happens bad until I put the first drink in my body. And we're going to ask ourselves the question, why do we put the first drink in our body? But I'm not even going to ask that yet. I'm just putting it out there to the universe for a few more sentences. So as the book continues, and David's already done a bunch, we love this technique that I think we first learned from speaker Mark Houston. When the book makes statements, turn these statements into questions. Personalize this. Because the egocentric alcoholic that I am, even as I read this book, with many, many readings and many, many years, I don't think it's talking about me. I want to say I am different. I think it's talking about you guys and your problem. So I need to ask myself honestly, do these characteristics apply to me? Here's some statements we're going to make about these allergic types. I'm going to read them as statements, and then we're going to convert them. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Sam, you want to give those words before we start to editorialize?
Yes. I have manifestation, allergy, phenomena, and craving. Manifestation is to make clear or evident. Allergy is an abnormally high sensitivity to certain substances or to alcohol, which I'm going to edit it to. Phenomena is a rare event, and craving is an abnormal desire as for a drug or as for alcohol. And then abnormal shows up in 2 of these definitions, so I decided to look up the definition of abnormal, and it's strangely irregular. So, in the sentences, we believe and so suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation, is to make evident of an allergy, which is abnormally high sensitivity to alcohol. That the rare event of an abnormal desire for alcohol is limited to this class and never occurs in the average tempered drinker.
Okay, thank you. So let's take these statements and start to turn them into some questions here. As an allergic type, can I use alcohol safely in any form at all? Can I drink only beer? How about just wine or natural wines, like it says later? Any kind of spirit? How about vanilla extract, maraschino cherries, rubbing alcohol, hand sanitizer? I've heard of some desperate alcoholics who've gotten their hands on, or maybe gotten their lips on just about anything they can. How about other intoxicants that affect the brain in the same way? Benzodiazepines, right? Affects the brain. I wish Ashton was here tonight. She would concur this for me in the same way it does alcohol. And I'm not even going to get into all the other drugs and I don't want to get controversial. Some of us can be allergic to some substances, not other. Me, in my experience, I'm allergic to everything, right? I got to steer clear of everything. So the question I'm going to ask myself is, can I use alcohol safely in any form? And for me, the answer is a resounding no. How about this? As an allergic type, once I've formed the habit, have I found I can't break it? So when I set out to have 2 drinks, and I have 3, I have 4, I have 5, I have 20, once that habit's begun, once the craving is kicked in, am I able to stop abruptly? I got to ask myself this. And the reason why I'm asking myself this and encouraging everybody else to ask yourselves this is to do some self-diagnosis. And these are great questions to work with the newcomer who's unconvinced. Yeah, I mean, if you would go to, again, don't want to jump ahead, but I think David mentioned this last week, page 44, there's a couple questions to ask, a newcomer to let them sort of self-qualify. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper. So this is a good series of questions to take them through. How about this? Have I lost my self-confidence about my drinking? What would it look like to lose my self-confidence about drinking? And by the way, for me, the answer is yes. If I'm constantly setting out to have a drink or a couple of drinks, and every time or damn near every time I'm overshooting the mark because I break out in craving and I can't control the amount I drink, my self-confidence was and ought to be shattered because I can't depend on being able to drink in a safe and healthy way. What's it going to be like when I go to that work event? What's it going to be like when I go out on that date? It's not going to end well. I have no confidence about my drinking because I can't control it. Have I lost my reliance upon things human? So what does it mean to rely on things human? Look at it, and David, I'm sure he's going to say the same thing. I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder because he always uses this. And I don't have kids. I only have dogs. But David always talks about the love a mother has for her children, right? Fathers, we know you love your kids too, but there's something special, something animal, goes back into the genes, into the biology, a special way in which mothers love their kids. Moms, did you ever try to stop drinking for your kids? And did it work? Anybody here go to a doctor and maybe you're starting to get jaundice, right? Or have some other condition. They said, man, you got to stop drinking. How about the job? If you show up smelling, reeking like booze or drunk again, we're going to fire you. Or the judge, or the cops, or the lawyer, or the wife, or the husband, or the friends. You must stop. All of these things are human. And they were not sufficient to convince me to stop drinking once the drinking began. Powerless. And then the last part, are my problems piling on me and becoming astonishingly difficult to solve? AKA, is my life unmanageable? And I love asking this question every time, David mentioned we go to treatment centers, a couple of different ones each month. We love it. And we go through this. We always go through Roman numeral 28, this paragraph, just like we're doing with statements and turn them into questions. I get to that last one. I'm like, come on, show of hands. They do show of hands and all these. Whose problems are piling up on them, becoming astonishingly difficult to solve. And out of 20, you get like 3 or 4 people raise their hands. And I'm like, guys, you're sitting in a treatment center. Please don't tell me you guys came in here on a winning streak, right? It just didn't work out that way. Because I know by the time you agreed to go into treatment, a whole bunch of stuff has been going down for a long time that precipitated you finally getting forced in here, right? How's the unmanageability of my life going? How are things working out of my own power?
Yeah, so another way to look at this paragraph for me anyways is a lot of times you go to meetings and people say, well, just don't drink and go to meetings. I mean, I heard that a whole lot of stuff. You know what that is? That's a message to my body. That doesn't really help me out a lot. Why didn't I think of that, by the way? Just don't drink and go to meetings. The problem is here, and it says that once having lost her self-confidence and reliance upon things human, what's the fellowship consist of? Human beings. I have a great sponsor. He's been sober a couple years longer than me. He's a brilliant guy. He's recovered. He's had a spiritual awakening. Sponsors a number of people. Does a lot of service. He's a human being. No sponsor. No meetings. No wife. No kids. Going to be able to get me to stay sober. This is not about not drinking, though. By the way, this is just abstinence. Is yes, the solution I have to have. But what I have to understand here is we are breaking down to understand the nature of this illness. And once I do that, this is the Bert's point, or I think it was Rob's point, maybe it was, or Rob's point, I believe, earlier before the meeting. On page 33, we had to learn to concede to our innermost self that we're alcoholics, right, Rob? Learn. We have to learn that. How are we going to learn that? By studying those pages up to 30. That's what we have to do. I didn't know meetings were called Alcoholics Anonymous after the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, of course they did. They didn't even know what to call the fellowship for a long time until the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous came out. And then they said, let's call that there too. So, and the last thing there are my problems piling up on me and becoming astonishingly difficult to solve. When I think about that, I have never met a stupid alcoholic or drug addict. I've met some dumb ones. I mean, come on. And I'm one of them. I was able to get it myself out of almost every scheme. Some of us did and some of us didn't. But there came a point one day when I put that drink in my body, all bets are off. I'm not a moderate drinker. I'm not a hard drinker. I break out in craving, and my problems are piling up on me. And my bottom was this. It was just this. It was a feeling. And I was in a psych ward, and I said, and I had this moment of clarity, which means that God froze a liar in me for just that moment and said to me, and I said, this is my life, and it's never going to get any better than this. And I took an action against all my nature and went to the payphone and called somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous and asked for help. My life has never looked the same again. So my problems piling up on me. No, that's unmanageability in my life. I don't have that unmanageability. I don't have those bedevilments in my life today. But here I need to know this, though. These are great. This is great statements to turn into great questions.
And there was a question, just wanted to make sure, again, terminology is so important here, right? Craving and obsession. So right now we're just talking about our physical powerlessness. So that first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. And as we're going to study, right, we're going to learn we're powerless in two ways. We're powerless physically, we're powerless mentally. Our physical powerlessness is our allergy to alcohol, and that allergic reaction is we break out in craving. So we don't crave, again, before the first drink. The craving kicks in after the first drink. And as we'll get to next week, as we won't get there tonight, the obsession is when we've stopped drinking and we swear off. The obsession is going to always lead us back to pick up that first drink again, which is going to then trigger the allergy where I break out in craving. Okay, continuing. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Let's just pause right there. Go ahead, David.
All right, so the best one I ever heard about this is, you guys ever pour a root beer in a glass, a nice cold glass, and the top of the root beer gets all frothy, right? Is there any substance to that? You put your finger through it, you put a knife through it. Like, none of that matters, right? It's just the frothiness of the whole thing. Or then in the reality of the whole thing, baby, please don't do this again. Please don't drink at my company picnic. You know what happens when you drink. Please, 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 just come home. The kids have a dance tonight that you got to drive to. I got to work. You're going to be there. Please, 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 Mom and Dad, please don't drink ever again. All these frothy emotional appeals were people that really, really cared about me. So as we look in the back of the book and we get into the chapters to the wife, to the family afters and the employers, we're going to find out those are the people that we got to practice all these principles in all my affairs. The bottom is, I didn't even realize these frothy emotional appeals that they had for me wouldn't suffice. I didn't, and I know that today. It's not enough. Why? Because human power.
And listen, if we're doing show of hands, nobody feel compelled to show your hands. And when we're saying, hey, ask yourselves a question, the goal here is not for anyone to feel bad about themselves or to self-flagellate. The idea is to ask yourself, put yourself in the role here and ask, am I a real alcoholic? Do I identify with what we're reading here? One of the best things that happens is when I say, hey, is anybody done crazy? Did you drive drunk in Broadside a convent? Somebody tells a crazy story like that. I love it. And then everybody bursts out laughing. And I know absolutely not one person is laughing at the alcoholic. 100% of us are laughing with the alcoholic because we've all done these insane things. So anytime we're asking you to ask yourself these questions, it's not with any spirit of judgment. It's strictly with the spirit of, identification and camaraderie. How many frothy emotional appeals did we hear? But everybody here has probably heard 100 of them, at least. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. If they are to recreate their lives.
So I got to jump ahead. Sorry, guys. Going to do it, David. I know that's not
Okay.
Page 45 of our book says the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient enough, and they failed utterly. Utterly means completely on my own free will. I can't not stay sober. And it says in nearly all cases, the idea must be grounded in the power of God. I think Bill's being a little liberal, or the doctor's being a little liberal there. And then the bottom thing there says recreate their lives. Change. This is about change. Change. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, I hear this phrase thrown around a lot whenever we hear speakers and the feedback from the audience. Oh, always get a message of depth and weight. You know, and again, let's use this terminology. Let's celebrate the terminology. Why not, as long as we understand it? The key here is that to start to compel an alcoholic person, they might understand and appreciate what we're trying to say, is it has to have some depth and some weight. This is in contrast to the frothy emotional appeal. What's the frothy emotional appeal? Like David said, oh, if you loved me, don't you care about me? Don't you care about the kids? Look what you're doing. Those are frothy emotional appeals. What's a message of depth and weight? Well, it starts with, hey man, guess what? You're not drinking because you're a bad guy. You're drinking because you're sick. I know this doctor. He studied this, tens of thousands of alcoholics. He figured this out. Can we talk about it? Let me help you understand it. Think of the sense of relief that you felt. I'm sure some of you, when you figured out you were sick and you weren't just a bad person, like probably a lot of people told you, and maybe you thought yourself, came to your own conclusion, I'm a bad guy, right? I have no willpower. I have no self-control. No, I'm sick. And by the way, I'm still sick. I'm just recovered from the sickness. I bring up my other chronic illness all the time, diabetic. Guess whose blood sugar is nice and stable right now because I'm properly educated and eating right and getting enough exercise? Me. I'm currently recovered from my diabetes. Still a diabetic. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they're to recreate their lives. All right, shot across the bow here, though. Right, so it goes from saying basically, if I want to get an alcoholic to start to buy in, I'm going to use this language buy because we know Bill was like a salesman, frothy emotional appeal ain't going to hack it. Got to have some depth and weight. They got to understand the magnitude of this and the scientific approach. And that as soon as we get them convinced in sort of a scientific and medical approach, we're going to say, oh, by the way, we're going to have to go find a little God, a little power that's going to then make my life better. Right? Doctor coming out swinging on this.
Hey, so before we end, we're going to end right there tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I circle back? Let's circle back, guys, back to that moral psychology on the prior page. So Howard Eber, who's on here, who's kind enough to help me out and is a friend of this group and myself, sent me this this text here. So it says, defining the word moral and psychology produces the wrong idea of what the doctor meant by moral psychology. And here's the definition. And Dr. Silkworth defined moral psychology in his 1927 article, Reclamation of the Alcoholic, in the Lancet Journals, as assisting alcoholics in overcoming the perspective of extreme self-centeredness and encourage them to adopt an attitude of consideration and care for each other. So that's what he meant by that. Thank you, Howard.
All right. So, yeah, thank you, Howard.